Hey everybody, it's PartyElite, and today we're diving back into Victoria 3 with a beginner's guide to highlight more common mistakes that can absolutely ruin your campaign or otherwise prevent you from doing your best, especially when it comes to war. For more Victoria 3 guides, let's plays, and more, don't hesitate to subscribe, and feel free to check out the link in the pinned comment down below to watch the full beginner's guide playlist. Now, with timestamps to jump around this video as you'd like, and with no more time to waste, let's begin. Targeting the wrong enemy. When picking a fight, make sure you're picking it with the right enemy, especially when you're about to engage a web of allies or subjects and their overlords. Not all political relationships are equal in Victoria 3, and military obligations only go one step up the hierarchy at most. That is to say, a puppet will always bring their overlord in, but other subjects of the overlord aren't likely to join outside of being swayed, and if the overlord has another overlord of their own, the likelihood of them joining is determined by a few factors. A perfect example of this is the situation in the Indian subcontinent. If you're trying to oust the East India Company, you don't actually want to declare war on the East India Company itself. If you make a diplomatic play against the company, you're going to see all of their puppets get involved, whereas if you declare war against just one of their puppets, it'll only be the targeted puppet and the company that are guaranteed to be involved, with Great Britain's likelihood of joining adjusted by a few factors I'll address in a moment. By targeting a subject in this manner and allowing the overlord to get involved, you'll still be able to target said overlord with war goals without their other puppets helping put up a fight. Apart from puppets and overlords, this logic applies to pact members as well. If a nation has defensive pacts with lots of other nations, don't declare war with said central nation. Instead, present your diplomatic play against one of the smaller nations it has a pact with to drag it into the war and force war goals upon it too. Separately, keep in mind that a nation that is already in a diplomatic play is highly unlikely to join another one. Note that this isn't a guarantee, as some nations will join multiple diplomatic plays at the same time, but if you want to increase the likelihood of abandonment by allies, overlords, and pact members alike, just wait until they're in a separate diplomatic play if you can. Again, not guaranteed, and it asks for a lot of patience, but it can be well worth it to avoid a bigger scuffle than you're ready for. Mobilizing troops too early. When you mobilize your troops or conscript battalions, you start to pay more and more out of the national treasury, and if you're playing as a nation with a relatively weak economy, this can be especially crippling. Beyond that, troops that are actively defending or advancing a front will see a huge number of losses through attrition, and this will directly reflect in their ability to fight, or perhaps I should say their inability to fight. Because of these two reasons, you should be very particular about when you mobilize your troops and when you send them to various fronts. Keep in mind that battalions that are garrisoned at the HQ, whether they've been mobilized or not, and whether they're assigned to a general or not, will be involved in all battles at fronts along that HQ. This means they'll be defending fronts at their HQ without being told to defend fronts and without being mobilized. And even if you have mobilized them, if you tell the general to stand by, the same circumstances apply, and they'll avoid the attrition that comes from being told to defend the front. Naturally, this isn't an option for any fighting that's happening in far-off territories or at an HQ where you don't have enough battalions to hold the enemy back. At these fronts, you'll still need to mobilize and send generals over, but this approach is very powerful at fronts along more well-manned HQs. Remember, attrition from being told to defend or advance a front can be as high as 20%, and these troops are all dying when they don't have to. Troops whose absence will be felt on the battlefield, troops that you'll have to retrain in the middle of a war and then afterwards too. So, keep them garrisoned for as long as possible, keep them on standby even if you've mobilized them, and let the enemy send their generals to the front to defend or advance as they please. Your soldiers will distribute themselves as needed along the fronts at their HQ, and though they won't get any advantages typically conferred to them by their general, they will have the advantage of being the defender, as outlined in the video I've linked under the eye at the top right corner of the screen and at the end of this video. Eventually, you will want to mobilize your troops and send them to actually advance against the enemy, but if you wait long enough, the enemy will have lost most of their strength to attrition and in their attempts at breaching through your garrison defenders. Knowing when to pull the trigger ties in to my next point. Misunderstanding Battalion Strength. The Battle and Warfare UI and UX in Victoria 3 sadly leaves a lot to be desired, obfuscating the depth of strategic and tactical decision-making to the point that sometimes you're not really sure why something works or doesn't. One of the biggest offenders on this front, in my opinion, is with regards to army strength. When you're investigating how many troops the enemy has brought to a front, you might be intimidated by the size of their battalion count, but like stuffing socks down their pants, this number is a lie and often makes things look bigger than they actually are. To reveal what you're actually dealing with, you need to click through to the generals and open up the detail panels to see the actual numbers of troops in each of the battalions. Each one of these represents a single battalion, and though a full-strength battalion is 1,000 troops, they don't stay at full strength after having suffered from deaths, whether from battle or attrition. That means an army that presents a certain battalion number isn't necessarily fielding as many troops as that number implies. They might be fielding significantly fewer, and one of your own armies with fewer battalions might actually have more troops, easily defeating the enemy who only appear to have the bigger army. You can see this during a battle as well. Often an army that appears to be outnumbered is actually the one with more soldiers on the battlefield, and while numbers aren't the only determining factor of who wins a battle, they are one of the biggest contributors outside of a massive technological difference between the two sides. On that note, you should take a look at the enemy you're fighting before you mobilize your troops. Investigate their barracks to see exactly what kind of equipment they have on hand. You might only need a fraction of their troop count to win your battles, and that'll save you a lot of money, and it'll keep your soldiers from dying pointlessly. So make sure you know what you're actually up against as opposed to what the game tells you you're up against. Keeping dead trade routes alive. Every trade route you've created creates a drain on your bureaucracy, the payoff being you shipping goods in or out of your nation and the income you make in the form of tariffs as that happens. It's a good system, but when bureaucracy goes in the negative, you'll start seeing tax waste, and this can really hurt your economy by causing a greater loss than the gains made through tariffs. Simply canceling trade routes can help you stay afloat by getting rid of the cost to bureaucracy, or you can make a trade agreement with a nation you trade a lot with at the cost of your tariff earnings. Even the slightest negative bureaucracy can cause trouble, and one of the easiest ways to avoid it is by staying on top of your trade routes. Trade is a major aspect of the game, so nothing here is just a fire and forget type solution. Keep an eye out for inactive trade routes, as these can be cancelled without hesitation. Fortunately, they're listed right at the top. You'll want to consider why they're inactive though, as you'll want to re-establish your most prosperous ones when they're likely to become active again. An embargo or war between your nation and the other is one of the most common reasons for a trade route to become inactive, and these will become active as soon as hostilities end or embargoes are lifted. Until such a time though, feel free to cancel them, and of course, after the war or the embargo is over, make sure to re-establish them. They won't magically come back on their own if you cancel them. Apart from that, a less obvious reason for trade routes to actually become inactive involves the destruction of shipping lanes. During war, keep an eye out for this notification, pointing out that your convoys have been sunk. Investigate the shipping lane being referred to here to see the status of your convoys and trade routes that are moving through said shipping lane. As more and more convoys are sunk, this percentage will drop, and the number of goods making it back and forth along the shipping lane will drop too, until the flow of goods eventually stops entirely, rendering the trade route inactive. At this point in time, the inactive trade routes will appear at the top of your market's trade route screen, and you may as well cancel them if you need the extra bureaucracy. It's not a bad idea to keep note of the ones that were particularly valuable so you can get them running again once you've been able to get the convoys rolling once more. Don't forget about cancelled trade routes that you were meaning to either bring back or replace. Again, if you cancel them, they won't activate on their own when the situation repairs itself. If you decide not to cancel them for whatever reason, they will become active once they can. Hopefully this video helps you avoid these extremely common mistakes that you might not even have realized you were making. Some information is really obfuscated in Vicky 3, and the way some mechanics tie in with each other can be confusing at the best of times. If this video helped, hit that like button and consider leaving a comment, and for more Victoria 3 guides, Let's Plays, and more, don't hesitate to subscribe. As always, a massive thanks goes out to all of the channel members and patrons who've been supporting the channel on a monthly basis. Y'all keep us alive and running smoothly. And of course, a big ol' thanks goes out to each and every one of you for watching. Until next time, cheers.